All right, I'm going to go ahead and call us to order. Thank you everyone for joining. Can we have a roll call, please?
Ashley Selman.
Here.
Don Desart. Peter DeCiani.
Here.
Julie Renahan.
Here.
Tim Elliott.
Here.
Robert Larson.
Here.
All right, great. So we have a quorum. Thank you. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
No public comment.
No public comment.
All right, great. So next is approval of minutes. I'd be looking for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All right, any discussion, corrections, anything like that? All right, please take a roll call vote.
Roll call, please.
Okay. Yeah.
Ashley Selman.
Aye.
Don Desart. Not here. Peter DeCiani.
Aye.
Julie Renahan.
Aye.
Tim Elliott.
Aye.
Robert Larson.
Here. Aye.
All right, so that passes. Thank you. I don't have anything under chairman's remarks today. Next is staff updates, talking about our grant program updates. John?
Thank you, everybody. Just a quick update on a few things. So interestingly, I just received this morning from IDOT their draft agreement for the Willowbrook Corners grant, which was good to see that they're moving forward with that. And I'll review that and get that, lined up on the committee at some point when we've gone through our editing of that agreement. Trails plan, kind of similar to other IDOT agreements, has been a little slow, and the CMAP agreement has not yet appeared at DuPage, and but DuPage is responsible for the consultant selection, the scoping, and all that, and we anticipate a track probably with agreements in September, October, a consultant RFP in December now because of the QBS schedule. So looks like that will happen then. RTA corridor planning grant, mobility plan. The first agreement regarding this grant was signed by DuPage in July. We're finalizing the scope and the RFP with RTA presently, and expect the RFP to go out either later this month or early October. And we'll talk a little bit about what we anticipate with that mobility plan when Jessica and Sarah from RTA talk a little bit later on in the program here. RTA has consented to join us this morning to discuss the transit recovery and what transit may look like in the near future. It's an important time for regional mobility and economic recovery. And interestingly, our mobility plan is going to kind of come in at this time of our history where, we were challenged mobility-wise before COVID came, and now we're ultra challenged, in terms of mobility after, during the time of COVID and afterwards. So I think RTA and DuPage are looking at this as an opportunity for the region to think about mobility and how we might, rebuild and reconstruct things in maybe a little different image than the way it exists today or before COVID. So with that, that's kind of my update on the grant programs. Any questions?
Questions from the committee? Okay. All right, next, thank you so much, John. Next up then is partner reports. So we have someone from PACE, I believe.
I don't see PACE on the screen.
Oh, no? Oh, no, yeah, Chris.
Hi,
yeah,
Chris.
yeah.
Sorry.
Hey, Chris, welcome.
Thank you. So to go along with what John just mentioned, COVID put a really damper on service, and we were already struggling somewhat to begin with. Overall, during the height of COVID, overall ridership was down about 70%. Over the last 3 weeks, we've seen it somewhat plateau, so it's pretty much been standard, and we're at about 50% ridership of pre-COVID. So on our fixed route service, it's roughly 50,000 trips a day. ADA paratransit, during the height of COVID, it was roughly 80% down. We're now at about 45% down on ridership, which equates to about 8,000 trips a day. Funding is down. As most of you already know, we're funded primarily through the RTA state sales tax. So sales tax is down roughly 22%. Our fare box is down roughly 60%. So there's definitely a shortfall that we're trying to address right now. And how we've been addressing that issue is we've reduced some of our expenses by reducing roughly 15 million. And mainly that was through suspension of services. We're also using CARES funding to help offset our funding shortfalls. So we've used about $20 to $22 million in CARES funding thus far. And every month we're drawing from the CARES funding to help us out on a monthly basis. We are meeting with the RTA regularly, working on our preliminary budget, which will be presented, staff will present that to our PACE board at their meeting in September. A lot of the routes that we suspended, we're using that equipment to offset capacity issues on the routes that are currently still operating. We're trying to maintain a capacity of 15 passengers or less on the buses. And again, just to reiterate, there is a funding shortfall, so there's a likely chance that some of those routes possibly will not be coming back, but we'll see. The CARES funding that we received should get us through to spring of next year. Some other news, some good news, we just recently, this past Monday, provided or put online booking on our on-demand service for the services that are served DuPage County, which are the Wheaton-Winfield on-demand, as well as the Naperville Aurora service. And just to familiarize yourself with how the on-demand works, it's a boundaried service area. It is another form of public transportation, so they're able to use their Venture cards or ride-free cards, and they call an hour in advance. The bus will pick them up and take them anywhere within that boundaried area. So now there's going to be an online booking component to make it easier for people that are looking to use that service. And that's really all I have. I wish I had better news for everyone. It's nice to see everyone, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Member Ozog? You're on mute. Yeah.
I have a question about the on-demand service. Do you have to pick it? I noticed bus stops that were identified for on-demand. Do you pick it up at a bus stop and then it will take you to where you want to go, or is it truly on-demand?
Very good question. So the on-demand service, how it works is it's a flex route. So there are timed connections that those services make. For example, the Wheaton-Winfield, there's timed connections that it will meet at the Wheaton Metro Station for those folks that are looking to transfer from the standard fixed route bus onto on-demand. However, it's open, it's free open. So okay, if you're within that boundaried area, it will come to a person's home and take them anywhere they want to go within the boundaried area.
So the origin and the destination are on demand, but
yes,
you have some link ups. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, John.
So with the online booking component now, it doesn't change the fact that you have to book the day before, or are there now new rules for booking?
So with on demand, you actually can book or call an hour in advance of when you're looking to do the trip. And that still is going to be there for folks that don't have internet access or access to a computer. So that you can still call in up to an hour in advance of when you need the trip, or you can do the online booking feature.
Okay, thank you.
That's fantastic. All right, any other questions for PACE today? All right, thank you so much, Chris, for joining us.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Metra. I see Dimitri is here.
Popped up, yes. Good morning. How is everybody doing?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hope everybody has been doing well and staying safe the past few months. I'll start out with some of the rough news, but I'll finish on a good note. So as everybody knows, it's been a challenging time for all transit agencies, especially commuter rail. Earlier in this pandemic, we were down to as low as 3% of our pre-COVID ridership. We have inched upwards. We are roughly about 10% now of our pre-COVID ridership. We are taking a lot of steps to encourage people to come back to Metro, use Metro. There's definitely a lot of traffic on the roads. I'm out there and I see there's people in the cars. We need to get more people on the train. We've posted videos on social media on our website about all the extra steps about cleaning our cars and everything and our stations. So hopefully the word starts getting out. There's going to be more marketing activity around that too as well. Anticipated budget shortfall. So in our August board meeting a couple weeks ago, our CFO announced that the projected shortfall through the end of 2021 is $682 million. We were provided through the CARES Act approximately $480 million. So as of right now, $200 million short. Of course, this is a very fluid situation, so that number can grow. I think there was some anticipation that ridership would increase a bit more after Labor Day, but I don't think that's going to happen based on some of the things we're hearing from companies and building owners in the city of Chicago. So that obviously greatly impacts the number of people who are going to board our trains. Ridership, because ridership is low, we've modified our schedules. We are still operating service on all 11 lines, but we've cut down from about 692 trains pre-COVID. We are operating 382 today, well, as of August 3rd. I don't think the schedule has changed since August 3rd. Specifically in DuPage County, the BN went from 97 revenue trains a day to 43. The Milwaukee West line went from 58 trains to 32. And the UP West went from 59 to 34. So we are monitoring ridership. We want to maintain social distancing. So as ridership increases, we'll add more cars to trains. And then when that's not sufficient, we'll start expanding service, adding more trains. The good news in DuPage County, we are still spending some money on capital projects. I mentioned before that we have an executed IGA with Elmhurst to contribute $2 million to their station and pedestrian tunnel project. We are looking to increase that another $2 million for a total of $4 million. So we're working on a draft IGA for that. Glen Ellen is a similar project, new station, platforms, and pedestrian tunnel. We're looking to do a similar contribution with Glen Ellen for $4 million total. West Hinsdale, we're currently rebuilding both platforms. If there's a little silver lining through all this, is that with lower ridership, lower operating number of trains operating is less, we've been able to expedite a lot of track work. Instead of phasing it, we're going out there doing work, so we're getting it done more quickly and saving money on those projects. West Hinsdale is an example of that. We've closed the station because ridership was just practically non-existent during this, to do both platforms at the same time instead of phasing it. So that station should be open up in around 4 to 6 weeks. We're replacing both platforms, fencing, and all that. Clarendon Hills, the village has undertaken a project to rebuild the station there. It's under construction. We have an executed agreement with Clarendon Hills to contribute $3.75 million in state bond programs, state bond program funds to that project. And Itasca, we completed the construction of new platforms in June. So we're still out there. We anticipate people coming back. We're making these improvements, saving money where we can. And that wraps up my presentation. If anybody has any questions now or in the future, feel free to give me a call or email.
Member Ozog and then Member Renahan after.
Thank you, Chairman Selman. I have a question for our Metro representative about the UP and what is going on with, my daughter had sent a complaint to Metro about mask wearing. It was on a weekend and it was kind of spotty, and also the fares are not being collected. My husband is going downtown several times a week now, and I'm unclear about the letter that my daughter was sent talked about. It seemed like a work action on the part of the conductors, but then I also understand that the UP is trying to no longer operate, their employees would no longer be operating Metra service. Can you enlighten me a little bit on what's actually
Sure.
going on? Because the lack of fare collection, obviously, I think the letter that my daughter received talked about losing $1 million. I don't recall exactly the number.
Yes, so it recently,
So what's
yeah,
going on?
Thank you. It made it in the papers this week.
Yeah.
At first, we were not collecting fares, right? People were bored. Well, there's really nobody boarding the train earlier on, back in April, May. We decided to start collecting revenue again. So Union Pacific, through a purchase of service agreement, we pay them to operate Metro commuter service on their 3 lines, the West Line, North Line, and Northwest Line. They have decided, for the protection of their employees and their employees taking the position that until there's a vaccine, they do not intend to interact with the commuters and collect fares. So that is an ongoing issue that we are working with the UP to resolve. All our other lines, 8 lines, including the BNSF, where we do also have a purchase of service agreement with them to operate that line, they are collecting.
So that directive is coming from the UP or
Correct.
from Union? It's coming from the UP, so it seems to be part of their initiative that they
It's a UP initiative, correct.
Okay, so they'd like to get rid of the purchase of service and have the conductors, et cetera, would be Metro employees. Is what their ultimate.
Well, that's two separate issues. The negotiations for Metra to take over commuter service predates everything with COVID. Right. The issue with the conductors not collecting, that's an issue, separate issue. But yes, so the other issue is UP wants to get out of the commuter rail business. And that doesn't mean terminating service. It would be somewhat similar to the BN, where the BN doesn't maintain the stations, doesn't maintain the platforms. It's either Metro or the municipality. It does that. They pretty much focus on the tracks, the right-of-way, road crossings, and anything related to commuter facilities is Metro or the municipality. And then BN currently, their employees are on the train. So their employees operate the train. They're the locomotive engineer, and they're the conductors, and they're the ticket agents. UP is looking to do something a little different, where I think we would assume more of those responsibilities.
Okay.
So
thank you.
It's a business decision. Yeah.
And thank you, Chairman Solomon. I need to go to another meeting, but thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for your helpful questions. Just to clarify really quickly, so the conductors aren't collecting cash fares, but if the person has like the Ventra where they just show it, they're still processing that, right?
Well, if they activate their ticket.
Yeah, so they're not like telling them like get in there and touch your phone sort of stuff?
You're right. The conductor is not going through the train. So if you don't activate your ticket, I mean, you could purchase a ticket and have a ticket, but if you don't activate the ticket, then you're essentially not using it.
Right.
Yeah. So it's ongoing. We've proposed some ideas, and I don't know where that's at in negotiations. It's a very high level issue that I haven't gotten all the updates, but I'm sure since this is now in the media, we'll be releasing some information soon.
Right. And then Member Renahan, I think you had a question next.
Yeah, quick question. Thank you, Chairman. It's easy to spray things down, ask people to wear masks. What about ventilation in the trains? Are you guys upgrading anything?
I don't know about upgrading. I'd have to check with our mechanical department, but I think they're doing, they've changed the filters and are changed the quality of the filters and changing them more often is what I understand. But to change the whole ventilation system on the train is not feasible.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate all your updates.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, and then our last partner update is from RTA. John, do we have RTA?
Yes. Jessica's with us today from RTA. Jessica, is Sarah with you too, or?
I am, yes, we're both here. Sorry about for the awkward pause. Yes, we're here. Sarah's going to go ahead and give an update first on the Mobility Services Department, and then I'll talk through our recovery planning. So Sarah, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Sarah Blair. I'm from the Mobility Service Department with the RTA. So what I do is I go out to the community and I work with older adults and people with disabilities and educate them on reduced fare, ride free, our free travel training program, and ADA paratransit. I just wanted to give you an update what's going on during COVID. We are still providing presentations, but virtually. So if you know any agencies that are interested in learning about RTA resources and the programs, feel free. I'll send out my contact information, send them my way, and I'll be happy to talk to them one-on-one. And then also with the programs like the reduced fare and ride free, you might be getting questions. We are doing a lot of that virtually and over the phone. We're processing renewals automatically, things along that nature. So we're trying to make everything super easy for our customers so they're able to still use public transportation, have those discount cards and all that goodness. So I'm going to send it over to Jessica and she's going to take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. So I am going to try to share my screen. John has given me a code, so let's see if we can do this. So hopefully you're seeing a slide that says Strategic COVID-19 Recovery Planning for Transit. Do you see that?
Good.
Yep, we see it.
Excellent. I didn't need the code, John. So I am the Director of Planning and Market Development at RTA. Thanks for having me. John asked me to come in and share some work that we're doing to think about the future in light of what you just heard from PACE and from Metra. This is a really challenging time for transit. So RTA has been doing a lot of work to plan for what we're calling recovery. So basically, how do we get back to some semblance of normalcy or new normalcy, knowing that things are going to look very different in the future. So we're doing a few things at RTA in that vein. One thing we're doing is continuing to talk about our strategic vision and our goals. I'm going to share those again with you in a moment, but basically in times like this in crisis, we know it's important to lean back on what we all agreed were our priorities before we were in crisis, and to not change our priorities, but think about how we need to adapt our strategies to achieve those goals and that vision in light of what might be a very different set of circumstances. We're also doing a lot to monitor and communicate pandemic impacts. I'll show you a few things here, but we're also putting out newsletters, and many of you might be on that mailing list. If you're not, let me know and we'll get you signed up so that you receive RTA's regular communications about all of the transit services across the region and what's happening with each of them individually, but more so collectively, kind of what's going on. We're also coordinating with a bunch of recovery efforts that are underway. You're all, I'm sure, working in recovery efforts in your own areas. We're working with the county board chairs out in the counties to talk about what recovery looks like. We're working with the city of Chicago and the city. We're talking to the state. Lots of folks are thinking about what recovery looks like for schools, what it looks like for the economy, for businesses. We're trying to do that with transit in mind. And those conversations are really helpful to us because we obviously know that we don't drive a lot of what the decisions that are being made about when people go back to work and how they move around. So they're useful to us, but we wanted to have a focused discussion about transit as well. So we're doing a scenario planning project right now that John wanted me to share with you. And in that project, we're looking ahead kind of right beyond the crisis that we're in right now, say 1 to 2 years. So not, again, right this minute because the service boards are handling that, but just beyond where we are right now. And we're thinking about what might be ahead and a range of different scenarios that might occur and how we might need to adapt if one of those does occur. We're also primarily using this as an opportunity to engage stakeholders like yourselves to say, okay, what kind of change do we want to look for in our transit system? Do we want a big change? Do we want a small change? How do we need to adapt going forward? So today I'll share a little bit more about that project. The strategic plan that I mentioned, DuPage folks were involved in developing it. It sets a very sort of strong vision for public transit as the core of mobility in the region, which I always say when I go out to the suburbs, into the collar counties. I know it's hard to envision, I think, when you live in the suburbs, but for a lot of people, transit really is the core of mobility. And we do have a vision for transit being something that everyone can take and really rely upon as a way to get around, regardless of the options that you have available to you. The plan also set 3 goals. The first goal, deliver value on our investment, looks at our fiscal responsibilities and funding. The second goal, build on the strengths of our network, looks at the existing system and how we build upon it to do better things. And the third goal, stay competitive, is about innovation. And we think those are all, again, really important right now because we're in the middle of a crisis. And so we need to, again, ask ourselves, how are we going to deliver value on our investment in a very different funding situation? How are we going to build on this existing network that we have, knowing that mobility needs might change? And how do we stay competitive, knowing that people might be reluctant to ride transit for a while? And a lot of people are riding right now, but a lot of people aren't riding as well. And issues like mask compliance, as we were just talking about, come up a lot now. So going into 2020, we expected this year to really be about capital investment, and Dimitri has shared a bit about Metro's capital work. The agencies are still doing a lot of construction, but that really was supposed to be our focus this year, along with these goals. But in March, everything changed. When the stay-at-home order went in place in March, things changed very quickly in the economy, in the way people move, people's willingness to travel, and transit was very much impacted, as Chris and Demetrios were sharing. This is a chart from a dashboard that RTA's created looking at ridership, and you can see in a chart here what they were talking about, and that ridership shifted very quickly from to being more about taking people who needed to take those essential trips, and folks who did not need to take essential trips or could work from home stopped taking transit altogether. So ridership really fell off a cliff and was down as low as 85% in March and April. As of August, it has sort of reached more of a steady state, and there's a little bit of an uptick, but we're about 66% below usual levels right now across all of our services. And PACE has been the least impacted in terms of change from 2019. That's the blue bar at the top. Metro has been the most impacted. So you heard that in both of what both of them were sharing. The agencies, things didn't only change in who's riding transit, but things changed in the way that the agencies needed to focus their energy. So they spent a lot of time on communication, on visible cleaning, on changing the way that they board and collect fares so that they can keep people safe and keep their operators safe. None of this was planned. It was all had to happen in reaction to what was going on around them. The other thing that they all did is tweaked service. So they also mentioned this, Chris and Jimmy's just mentioned this, but here you can see it on a map. So on the left is a map of our transit system under usual circumstances. And on the right is the map with the routes that have either been reduced or eliminated right now temporarily in gray. So you can see how those changes really impact the footprint of transit. And Metro's operating about half their service. PACE has about 99 routes that they're not running, as they mentioned. So it looks a little different now as a result. The funding itself has also been impacted, as they both mentioned. Sales tax and fare box revenue, our two kind of main sources of funding, are down a bunch. And the CARES Act funding will help make up the difference this year and probably part of next year, but not all of next year. So we know we have some significant challenges ahead. We're also not alone, for better or for worse. Transit agencies across the world are experiencing the same thing. This chart is from UITP, which is a professional organization of transit agencies around the world. And this chart shows in the weeks after they lifted their lockdown measures, where ridership was compared to previous years, the previous year. So no transit agency anywhere in the world has fully recovered yet. not even in the areas of Europe and China that have recovered, kind of came out of lockdown much earlier than we did. RTA is down sort of the bottom of the chart with New York and London, who are still kind of struggling to recover riders. So on the basis of all of this, we know we have some challenges ahead. And so we did a scenario planning project where we looked at a few different scenarios and said, okay, how would each of these scenarios impact the world? How would they impact specifically the economy and how transit funding will be impacted? How will they affect commuting and who's actually going to work versus who's working from home? We looked at transit mode choice and of the people who are commuting, who's actually deciding to take a train or a bus. We then estimated the impact of those scenarios on funding overall relative to 2019. And we look at funding really because that represents the buying power for the collective amount of money we have to pay for transit. And if we have less overall, then we know we can't provide as much transit unless we find other sources of revenue. So it's sort of this is a helpful way for us to look at a few illustrative futures and have a good conversation about what may be ahead. It's not predicting the future. It's not saying that one thing is more likely than the other to occur, but it's really meant to frame an early discussion. So we looked at 6 scenarios. They range from a stalled economy in which really we're in a depression basically. No one's traveling around, no one can afford to do much, to, on the other end of the spectrum, what we call the regional remix, which is a much more positive view of how the economy might recover and people are not only commuting again, but are taking transit and everything in between. None of them predict that we'll be back to where we were in 2019. So in none of them say normal, none of them say new normal, because we don't think we're going back there. We think based on what we're reading, what we're hearing from CEO surveys, what we're hearing from talking to people is that businesses are going to let people work from home more, and that obviously some sectors cannot work from home, and that will, those sectors we continue to meet their community needs, but many of the people who take the train downtown or to office jobs may not need to commute every day. So we've captured that in our 6 scenarios. We have been talking to our board, to the RTA board a couple of weeks ago, and to some stakeholders about this project. And we've been focusing really on 3 of the scenarios. 6 is a lot to talk about. 3 of them here represent kind of the bookends and one in between. The bookends are the stalled economy on one hand, that's that depression scenario, regional remix on the other end, and then a congested recovery one, which looks at car use. So we then define each of the scenarios. In the case of the stalled economy, we basically create a sense of what's happening with the economy, with commuting, and with mode share relative to 2019, and use that as our gauge for how we think transit will be impacted. So in this scenario, there's a depression going on, so unemployment is high. That means that both the economy and commuting overall are way below 2019 levels, and people are not comfortable taking transit, so transit mode share is also down. This unfortunately could happen anytime, and we don't really have policies in place that will help us navigate this if this does occur. We would definitely need to make some changes. The congested recovery scenario, this one is a little different. This one basically says the economy is actually doing pretty well, so things bounce back, but everyone wants to drive, so people are not comfortable with transit. They're not commuting overall as much because they're able to work from home, and they're afraid to take transit for whatever reason. So what happens is that there's so much congestion in this scenario that actually economic activity is a little bit stymied by this experience of driving. This could also happen in the near term. One would argue that this is starting to happen now. As we're seeing people go back to work, it looks like a lot more people are returning to driving more quickly than they're returning to transit, who have an option either way. Our current policies can't prevent or navigate this really, and we would again need some new ways of thinking about things to prevent this from occurring. The third scenario, the regional remix one, this one is a little bit more positive. This one says, the economy could rebound and actually exceed 2019 levels. Telecommuting is probably here to stay, so that commuting overall is down, but transit is doing well. People feel good about transit. They trust the shared economy and the way that transit, the experience of shared transit fits into their lives. And so this probably won't happen right away. This would probably not happen until there's a vaccine. So we're talking 2 to 5 years out. And this also requires some policy interventions. This would definitely require, especially in the suburban areas, this would require aggressive, requirements for travel demand management or parking pricing or something that incentivizes people to take transit. Maybe it's a different kind of transit, we don't know, but it requires actions on our part to get there. So when we look at, those are kind of the inputs, when we look at the outputs of each of those scenarios, this is where we get a sense for how much funding we would have if those were to become reality. So in these charts, we show the amount of public revenue, so this is tax revenue, and the amount of system revenue that comes from fares as they're combined in our total funding. And in the stalled economy scenario on the left, we see we'd have as little as 45% less funding than we did in 2019 in that scenario. So a significant cut because both tax revenue and system revenue are down. In the congested recovery scenario, we're looking at a 20% less than 2019 funding level. And in that case, you see sort of, you see that system revenue, public revenue is actually doing pretty well because the economy is doing fine, but system revenue is not doing well. And so that yields less funding overall. In regional remix, we might have a little more funding to work with. And that one we're saying 5% more. And here's how they all compare to 2020. This shows 2020's estimate for where we might land. We're thinking we'll end up 25% less than where we are right now, which is significant, but the CARES Act funding, again, that will be used to fill that gap. And we don't know how long that money will last. We don't know if we'll get another federal package. So there's definitely pressure to make that last. So in terms of next steps, we've taken that information to our board. We are now meeting with stakeholders. We had a couple of workshops to do that. We also have a survey out right now. We're coming to folks like you, so I appreciate this opportunity to share it with you. We would very much appreciate if you could fill out that survey and share it with others, because we really need to understand from the region how much people want to see change and how much change people want to see and what folks think is the opportunity right now, because it's a challenging time, and on any day, I think changing something in a very large system like ours is hard, and I think it's going to be even harder now, but we might have a window of opportunity. The RTA board was very bold about, several board members spoke up about their support of changes to transit, and we're hearing a variety of ideas from stakeholders, so we'd appreciate that. We are going to present this to the county board chairs next week. Our executive director is going to do that. And we're also going to be talking with CMAP. So we're going to be getting some input from the suburbs via those means. But if you do have a moment to fill that out or to send folks to do so, I think that would be helpful to us. So that's really all. I hope I didn't overstay my welcome, but I'd be happy to take any questions or hear thoughts from you on what you think our challenges might be or what kinds of changes we should be thinking about.
Jessica, thank you so much for a really comprehensive presentation. I think the way you've kind of compared the economy and ridership and linked those is really interesting to me. I just sort of my own feedback on remote work. I know in our household, my fiance was originally told maybe after Labor Day you'd go back, and now it's maybe next summer. And his department will probably be mostly remote. And I also know the only people I know who are commuting downtown are doing so in cars. So I think that lines up pretty well with what you've seen. I would just ask that you would send maybe this presentation. I'd love to dig a little bit more just for my own nerdy interest into the different economic situations you laid out. And then please also send us that survey link. If you just send it to John, he's always great about distributing that to all of us. I'm sure many of us will take that survey and then push it out to our networks. Member Elliott, do you have a question?
I just wanted to echo what you said, Chairman Snellman. I thought it was an excellent report and the slides were outstanding. So thank you very much.
Member Renahan?
Same. I appreciate learning. I think it's so important right now what's going on with COVID. And I hope we've got some, possibly we'll have some federal assistance coming through if that HEROES Act ever goes through. The question I had is there any discussion also, we know COVID is a huge issue, but we also know that racial justice and diversity is a big issue. Is that kind of an arm of the conversation that's going on with RTA right now in terms of, you know, how we get the people who most need public transit to work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, it is. It always is, at least in my time in RTA. So yes, the same strategic plan I mentioned outlines a few different markets of importance. And a couple of those markets do look at, or we developed those markets, I guess, based on differences we were seeing commute times, particularly for Black and Brown communities on the south and west sides of Chicago. Many of them have very, very long commutes. They tend to be transit dependent and they tend to be going out of the city. So a lot of the rail connections go downtown quickly, but that's not where people need to go. So we have been thinking already, we were already thinking about, you know, how do we improve transit connections and how do we look at some maybe, PACE actually has a lot of services that meet people's needs from the south suburbs to go out to some of the big distribution facilities that are out there. So we were already thinking about that, and I think now we definitely want to keep thinking about that as we think about what transit should look like. Also right now, of the sort of 500,000 people or so that are riding each day, many of them are on the south and the west sides, and we saw that coming when and actually not just the south and west sides, it's also south and west sides of Chicago, it's Waukegan, it's Elgin, it's Aurora, it's clusters of people who are working in essential worker jobs, and they do tend to be low income, they do tend to be people of color, they do tend to be folks who are transit dependent, and so we do need to pay attention to those groups, and we are, but we appreciate that kind of feedback because that helps us understand that that's a priority for the whole region, not just for us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Great question. Is there any other questions for any of our guests before we move on? All right. Thank you so much, Jessica, Sarah, Chris, and Demetrius for your very thorough presentations. I know we've missed seeing you guys all as you've been trying to figure out how to weather the last few months. So it's been really great to hear updates and see all the great work you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right. Let me pull up my agenda here. All right. Anyone have any old business? Any new business?
I was just going to comment, as Dimitri, just wanted to say, unless our budget process changes, we are on the October 13th DuPage County Board agenda to present our 2021 budget.
Great. Awesome. Look forward to seeing you then. All right. Any other questions or other business today? All right. Without objection, we're adjourned. Thank you so much for a full meeting today.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.